today about Palm Sunday, and in the Bible there's a story about Jesus coming into a city called Jerusalem. And if you read it in the Bible, it's a really cool story, and you probably heard about it before. You know, people throwing palm branches down and their coats and stuff down so a little donkey can ride on it and all that stuff. And we're going to talk about that, but we're not going to stop where the story normally stops. We're going to kind of keep on going into Jerusalem a little bit, and it's a little bit more challenging part of the story. But let me start reading in Luke chapter 19, beginning at verse 28. It says, after telling the story, Jesus went on toward Jerusalem, and he was walking ahead of his disciples. And as he came to one of the towns called Bethpage and Bethany on Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples ahead of him. And here's what he said. He said, go into the city, and you're going to find a young donkey there. All right? And this donkey's going to be tied there, and nobody's ever ridden it before. He said, untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks, why are you untying that donkey? Just tell them the Lord needs it. Now, this is kind of an interesting scenario, because if you stop and think, you know, if somebody walked into your yard and you had your donkey tied up there, I mean, everybody's got a donkey, right? And somebody just starts untying your stuff, you're probably going to say what? What are you doing? What the heck are you doing? You know, what are you thinking here? That's my donkey, not your donkey. And if they just said, well, hey, you know, the Lord needs it. And now, it doesn't say in the Bible what the transaction really was, but it unfolded exactly the way Jesus said it was going to happen. They went there, they found the donkey, and they started to untie it, and guess what the owner said? Why are you untying my donkey? And they just said, the Lord needs it. Now, I don't know if this guy knew who Jesus was. I don't know. I'm assuming there was a little bit of conversation that went on, because you're not going to just let somebody walk away with your donkey. You know, when they say, oh, the Lord needs it. Well, oh, yeah. Well, hey, tell me about this Lord guy. But the bottom line is he let them have the donkey. So they come back with a donkey, right? They come back with a donkey, and Jesus basically rides the donkey. So one of the first things, I think, that God asks us to do if we're going to receive Him into our life and let Him kind of take control is we've got to be willing to untie some stuff. Maybe He is owning us instead of we're owning it. You see where I'm going with this? I mean, it's not unusual, I think, to think that we own something when in reality it owns us. When we say, oh yeah, I'm in total control of this situation, and it's like the Cookie Monster, right? It's like, me can quit anytime, you know? It's like, I can quit anytime, I've got total control. It's like, yeah, right, sure. I don't know if you've ever thought about that in your life. Are there certain things that are a part of your life that you say, I got total control over this thing, and in reality, it controls you? You're going to find out as we talk through the story that Jesus asks us to let go of certain things. If we're going to be His follower, basically that means I'm going to go where God goes, I'm going to do whatever He wants me to do, I'm going to be obedient to whatever He tells me to do. And sometimes that means letting go of stuff that may be holding on a little too tightly to us. Whatever that is, it's different for a lot of people. But Jesus may be saying, you know, it's time to untie that because I need that. I need that, not you. So, Matthew 10:37-38 says, anyone who loves their father and mother more than me isn't worthy of me. Jesus is the one talking here. He says, anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me isn't worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me isn't worthy of me. Jesus is not just alluding to, He is teaching the fact that if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, there are going to be some stuff that maybe you have to give up. You've got to quit doing. Or you have to give Him control of it. And the question that I would have for you is, what would be the deal breaker if Jesus asked you to give them? I've talked to a lot of people in the last 40 years and that, you know, they say they're a follower of Jesus, but then it's like Jesus says, well, are you willing to give this up in order to keep following? I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure. Jesus bumped into a bunch of people and asked them this question. Are you willing to release your hold on this in order to come follow me? One guy who was pretty rich, the Bible calls him a rich young man. He says he looked at Jesus and he said, what do I have to do to get eternal life? And Jesus says, well, keep the commandments, do all that stuff. He says, I've done all that stuff. Jesus says, well, hey, there's one more thing. I got to ask you that. He says this. Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. And then, come follow me. You'll have treasure in heaven. Don't worry about, your stuff. Just release your hold on the stuff that's holding you. And the Bible says this guy, that was his deal breaker. He was willing to go to Sunday school. He was willing to go to church. He was willing to, do what the law required him to do as a Christian or as a follower of God. But when it came to selling his stuff, come on, I worked awful hard to get this stuff. And Jesus said, that's your deal breaker. Everybody's got a deal breaker that you've got to work through and say, am I willing to give this up if God asks me to give it up? And Jesus asked different people to give up different stuff. They were walking along the road, and a man said to Jesus, I'm going to follow you wherever you go. And Jesus replied, hey, foxes have dens to live in, birds have nests. I haven't got a place to lay my head. Now, back in the day, if you were going to become a follower of someone who taught the Bible, like Jesus, and he says, come follow me. He was a rabbi, and people became his disciples. They knew that they were going to wind up living wherever he was living. And this guy says, I'm going to follow you wherever. He says, don't you live in a nice place? No, hey, I haven't even got a house, man. If you're going to be my follower, we're going to sleep on the streets most nights. Are you still in? Or is this a deal breaker for you? Wow. Are you willing to give up your house? Are you willing to change your standard of living? To live within maybe your means so that you can have money to give to the poor? It's a good question. Good question. On our way to church this morning, we were on the freeway, San Jose, one of the places in America that has a very high population, high density population of homeless people. We drove right by a homeless encampment that you can kind of see from the freeway downtown. They're here, folks. Are we willing to give up some of our stuff so that the less fortunate can have some? Well, one guy said, Jesus said, follow me. And he replied, well, let me go bury my dad first. We don't even know if the guy's dad was dead. It's like he could have just been saying, and what if the guy's dad was like, 35? It's like, hey, when my dad dies, then it's the deal. But, a little time. Give me some time. Another person just said, hey, let me go back and say goodbye to my family before I start following you. And Jesus said, nope. Are you willing to give up a relationship maybe that you shouldn't be involved in order to follow Jesus? That happens sometimes, right? Wow, that's tough stuff to be able to untie yourself from something maybe that Jesus is saying, you need to leave that behind in order to be my follower. Now, the next thing that happens in the story is as Jesus is riding along with this donkey, the crowds, says, spread their cloaks or their garments on the road ahead of him. Now, this isn't like America where you've got a giant closet, you're going to buy a house and you got to make sure it has enough closet space, right? And Janice and I bought this little tiny house built in 1940 and it's got like these micro closets, okay? They're like 3 feet. You're going like, wow, where do I put all my stuff, I mean, back in the day, if you had one set of clothes on your back, you're good to go. I mean, to have an extra cloak, wow. Most people were poor. Most people were living in poverty. Most people didn't have a lot of stuff. And so they traveled pretty light back in the day. So to take your coat and to lay it on the ground and let a donkey walk across it, I mean, it could ruin it forever, right? I mean, you take your best coat and put it on the ground for a donkey to walk on. Hello? Well, what's the story here? Well, see, these crowds were so excited about receiving Jesus that they were willing to lay down their best clothes to allow a donkey to walk on. What's the point for us? I remember when I was growing up, I don't know if you've ever been involved in one of these things. They have things called canned food drives. Anybody have been involved in canned food drive? You know what that is, right? Okay. Usually happens around Thanksgiving, Christmas time. It's like, let's bring in canned food for the poor, right? People don't have enough to eat. Let's bring it. When I was a kid, I loved canned food drives. You know why? Because I would go to my mom's cabinet and open up, and I would get the Del Monte fresh cut sweet cream style corn. Oh my goodness. Who eats this stuff, right? Okay. You need some serious counseling, dude. Okay. Cream corn, not just cream corn. I would also get out the fresh cut leaf spinach, right? I mean, this stuff is like limp as a dish rag and tastes worse, right? And then sliced beets. I want to know, how does Del Monte even make a living on this stuff? This is ridiculous, okay? I would take all that stuff and I would give it away. I mean, the poor just love me, right? You know, I'm telling you, I'm not giving the poor my Frosted Flakes, or my Nilla wafers, or my Sunshine High Rocks, which is better than Oreos. Okay, these are America's first cream-filled chocolate cookie. Okay, none of that was going into the canned food drive. Why? It's mine. Okay, get the point? See, so many of us are willing to give, a Coke to the Coke drive if it's our old Coke. But how many of us are willing to go down and buy a brand new, best you can buy coat for somebody who needs something? And I think this is the point. Are we willing to give our best to God? Not the leftovers, not the worst stuff in the pantry, the best stuff. And I think this is what these people were showing, is that they were willing to give their best to receive the Messiah, God, who was going to save them. Wow. That's pretty good news. That's what we need to be thinking about, I think. Jesus said in John 15:13, there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. We've been talking about Abram, in the last several months. He's called the friend of God. And God asked Abram, leave your family, leave your home, just pack your stuff and go to a place where I'm going to show you where it's going to be along the way. Okay? And Abram packed it up because he was God's friend. He trusted God. He was willing to release his hold on stuff that could have had its hold on him in order to follow God where God was telling him to go. And that's what God is asking us. Are you willing to give up that stuff that might be controlling you? And are you willing to give your best stuff, not your worst? Now, the next thing that happens on this little journey that Jesus is on this donkey, it says in verse 37, when he reached the place where the road started down to the Mount of Olives, closer to Jerusalem, it said, all of his followers began to shout and sing as they walked along, praising God for all the wonderful miracles they'd seen. Now, one of the things that was a part of worship back in the day when Jesus was on the planet is shouting. I mean, just full out shouting. Now, anybody here gone to, what's your favorite sports team? Anybody? Sharks, okay, who else? Earthquakes, all right. Who else? Yeah, Giants fans here, yeah, okay. 49ers fans, Dodgers fans. Yeah. Dude, this guy needs some serious counseling. Okay. Anyway, now we would go to these games, right? And what happens to these games? Something exciting happens, and what happens? People shout. People scream. People, they throw beer on each other. They get crazy. They do dumb things. But most often, the big deal is shouting. A whole lot of shouting. You even have people that lead cheers in some of these games, right? Why? Because you're going to shout for your team. You're going to shout because you get excited. These people were so excited when they came to worship God, and when they saw Jesus coming, hey, they just started shouting. They started shouting. Now, it's spontaneous, it's genuine. They were excited. In Psalm 29, it says this is really cool. The voice of the Lord twists the mighty oaks and strips the forest bear. In other words, the voice of God is so powerful, so strong, that it blows the leaves off of all the trees. We're talking, okay? This is a loud shout of God, okay? And it says, in his temple, everyone shouts glory. The reason that those two sentences are together is because the kind of noise that God's voice makes, the people are trying to emulate that. And when they shout, they're going to blow the leaves off the trees. Okay? I don't know if you ever did this before. Shout in church. Shout in church. We're going to do that. Okay? We're going to do that. I'm not going to do it too loud because I don't want the people on the internet to get, like hurt their ears, right? Something's wrong with my internet. Anyway, but you guys do it, all right? On the count of 3, I just want you to shout one word and shout it really loud like you are at your favorite sports arena, okay? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You can do this. Okay? I can see fear in your eyes, Annie. It's okay. You can do this, all right? On the count of 3, we're going to shout glory as loud as you can. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Glory! That is pretty good for a bunch of Mennonites, man. That is really good. Okay. Psalm 32:11 says this. So rejoice in the Lord and be glad. All of you who obey him, shout for joy. All you whose hearts are pure. In other words, because God has forgiven you of your sins, you are ecstatic. You are so overjoyed. You're like, yeah, buddy. Okay? Psalm 40, verse 16 says this, but may all who search for you be filled with joy and gladness in you. May those who love your salvation repeatedly shout, the Lord is great. Now you know what's coming, right? This says repeatedly shout. So on the count of 3, we're going to say it 3 times, all right? Not say it, we're going to shout it. 3. So these people out there going like, what in the world is going on? Right? Okay? We're going to shout. What am I shouting? We're shouting, the Lord is great. Okay? On again. 1, 2, 3. The Lord is great! The Lord is great! The Lord is great! That is great! That is so awesome. Okay. That is awesome. Okay. Psalm 65:8 says this. Those who live at the ends of the earth stand in awe of your wonders. From where the sun rises to where it sets, you inspire shouts of joy. Wow. I mean, for as far as you can see, where the sun is setting way over there, and where it rose way over, everywhere in between, people are just shouting praise to God because he is so great. It must have been a cool scene where Jesus was on his donkey and everybody's shouting, yeah! Wow, to be there. That's so cool, right? But most people stop there on Palm Sunday. Okay? Yeah, this is really cool. Interesting thing happened next. Verse 41 says this. As he came closer to Jerusalem and saw the city ahead, he began to weep. I mean, get the contrast here? These people are so excited. They're so happy, overfilled with joy. They're shouting, they're singing, they're dancing, they're doing the boogaloo. I mean, here they are, and Jesus starts to cry the closer he gets to the city. It says he begins to weep. How I wish today that you of all people would understand the way to peace. But it's too late. Peace is hidden from your eyes. Before long, your enemies will build ramparts against your walls and will encircle you and close you in from every side. They will crush you in the ground and your children with you. Your enemies will not leave a single stone in place because you did not recognize it when God visited you. See, Jesus was the Messiah. He was God in human flesh. And these people were praising God that he was coming into the city to be their deliverer, but they didn't get what his message and what his mission was really about. He said, you guys don't get it. This is about peace. You see, they were being oppressed by the Romans. And the Roman had an army, a big army, bad army. And they were praying that the Messiah would come and he would marshal their own army and they would blow these Romans away and get rid of them forever. In other words, they'd start a war. And they would just dust them. And Jesus is saying, you don't get it, you don't get it, you don't get it. I didn't come to obliterate people. I came to save them. I came to make peace, not war. Not war. And so they were hoping that he was their warrior king. And he was saying, no. I'm the one who brings peace. I'm the one who brings peace. Interesting. And then Jesus enters the temple. He gets off the donkey, he enters into the temple. He begins to drive out people that are selling animals for sacrifice. You see, when people came to the temple, they knew they had sin in their life, and so that to get rid of their sin, they would bring an animal, a goat, a sheep, sometimes a little dove if that was all they could afford. And there were people who were selling these animals on the outside of the temple, at exorbitant prices, inflated prices, because people were desperate. They wanted their sins forgiven, and that was the only place they could buy an animal, and these guys were gouging them in order to be able to give them the animals they needed for sacrifice for their sins to be forgiven. And Jesus was ticked. This isn't a place of commerce. This isn't a place where you rip people off. This isn't a place where you do business. This is a place where you meet God. Where you meet God. He said to them, the scriptures declare, my temple is supposed to be a house of prayer. But you've turned it into a den of robbers. A bunch of thieves. So he began to clear out the temple. He cleared it out. And I wonder, along with all the stuff we've talked about, are we willing to let go of certain things? Are there things that maybe in the temple, and now your body's the temple, is there something that you're doing, that you've attached yourself so tightly to, you're all bound up in it, that it keeps you from worshiping God? It's a good thing. Think about it. Something you need to clear away, you need to get rid of, that's blocking your relationship with God. See, right after this, Jesus, after he clears the temple, says after that he taught daily in the temple, but the leading priests and the teachers of the law and other leaders of the people began planning how to kill Jesus. Why? It says because they couldn't think of what to do, because the people there, they hung on every word Jesus was saying. You see, after the temple finally got cleared out, and they realized that Jesus was there to teach them what peace with God was all about, they were just soaking it in. Every day they go and they listen to Jesus' words, because he brought this peace that the other religious leaders weren't bringing. And it was driving those religious leaders nuts. But the question that I have is there something maybe that's blocking our ability to hear what Jesus is trying to speak to us? What he's trying to say to us? Maybe he's saying, there's something you've got to untie in your life. Something that's got you bound that you don't even realize. It's got control of you, and you need to get control of it. And maybe untie yourself from that thing. Maybe it's just purposing in your heart to give God your best, not the leftovers. Maybe it's being more vocal about how great God is. I mean, a lot of people don't like to hear people talk about God. They don't. I think you're weird, kind of a strange person if you say, man, thank God for that. God is so good. He is so awesome. I love God so much. People get a little nervous. Maybe we need to shout more about all the good things that God is doing in our life. And maybe we need to think about our personal relationship with God. When we come to meet with God, is there something that's blocking our relationship with God? Something maybe we need to clear out of our house or our activity schedule that's just taking up way too much of our time, too much of our energy, that keeps us from having this personal talk with God so we can listen and hear Him speak into our life. I think those are all good questions we need to consider, right? As we start thinking about how do we receive Jesus in our life. Right? Let's pray. God, thank you for loving us. Thank you for coming into our city, coming into our lives. And God, we just ask that you would help us do whatever we need to do to untie ourselves from something that's got us all wrapped up. And maybe we need to clear something out of our lives so we can have a better opportunity to listen to you. Whatever it is, God, I ask that you would help us to do that so we can shout out how good you are. Thank you, God, for loving us so much. In Jesus' name.